Good day. My name is Julia from Velden, and thank you for coming to my presentation about understanding bushmeat hunting in Malawi using expert and community knowledge as part of our symposium on understanding the illegal wildlife trade from supply to demand. This is my talk structure. I'll start off by talking about bushmeat hunting as a concept in general, and then moving on to the Malawian context. I'll also talk about how we can combine multiple evidence sources to understand this issue using fuzzy cognitive mapping as a process. I'll talk through the methods, results, and conclusions of this project. So, bushmeat hunting, or the harvesting of wild animals for meat, is a key threat to biodiversity in many parts of the world. Bushmeat hunting has been found to cause species decline or defaunation around the world in both forested and savanna regions and affecting common and rare species. For example, harvesting for human consumption is the largest threat to 98% of threatened megafauna. The impact specifically on protected areas can be substantial, and they're exacerbated by a wide range of factors, including encroachment, poor governance and corruption, food insecurity and poverty, chronic underfunding, and weak or poorly enforced wildlife laws. However, bushmeat hunting is both a conservation and a human rights issue, as it forms a substantial part of both income and protein requirements for many of the world's most marginalized people. Therefore, the approaches used must be equitable and inclusionary in their nature. Bushmeat hunting in Malawi has been found to be quite significant, and our previous research has indicated that a maximum of 19% of households living near protected areas hunt for bushmeat, and between 5 and 40% consume it. There have been evidences that this has caused severe declines in the abundance of wildlife both inside and outside of protected areas. Recently, however, as a response to this, there has been an increase in conservation investment in Malawi, as well as legislation resulting in severe penalties. There have also been public relations campaigns, as seen in these pictures below, to educate people about the consequences for hunting bushmeat. Because bushmeat is known as a wicked problem, where there are a multiplicity of vectors, drivers, and other interlinked issues, such as food security, this really requires a holistic approach to building evidence. So in our case, we used an approach with a series of interlinked questions, each sequentially feeding into the other. For example, we started by understanding how much bushmeat is hunted and consumed in Malawi, moving on to understanding the drivers of this, and then understanding how different interventions may lead to behavior change. Next, we wanted to look at these interventions in the context of the whole system and understanding how they can then be linked into policy. I'll be talking about these last two aspects, where we want to generate a systems model and then integrate interventions into policy. To do this, we used a method called fuzzy cognitive mapping, or FCM. FCM is a type of participatory modeling, which is a purposeful learning process for action that engages the knowledge of stakeholders to create formalized and shared representations of a reality. This enables knowledge sharing as well as conflict resolution and decision making. Fuzzy cognitive mapping, a type of participatory modeling, results in a model of how a given system operates. This is achieved by defining important variables and then linking them by describing their relationships to each other, using expert stakeholder knowledge and other data sources. FCMs are useful because they are quick and easy to acquire, especially in data-poor situations, and can incorporate as many different knowledge sources as needed. This most importantly, fuzzy cognitive mapping can help to encourage systems thinking, where we explore interrelationships, we can encourage different perspectives, and understand the boundaries of a system as a whole. To do this, we used a multi-stage process where we approached individuals working in the conservation sector in Malawi at various levels and asked them to complete a questionnaire. We asked them to identify the most important components of the system and then describe the results to each other. We then used this to create an individual cognitive map for each participant, and then we combined them into an initial group map to use for discussion. We then held a workshop in Lilongwe in 2019, where we presented this group map and then added both the stakeholders' expert knowledge as well as other sources of data from previous scientific research. This allowed us to arrive at a social group cognitive map for both hunting and consumption of bushmeat in Malawi. To use this to run different intervention scenarios and see how they will impact the system as a whole. These are the results. This is the fuzzy cognitive map for bushmeat consumption. What we're seeing here is that the grey blocks, which represent the different variables identified as important, are linked to each other by different relationships. They can be negative, the orange arrows, where one variable increases, the other decreases, or positive, where one increases, the other increases. I won't talk too much about the different components of the map, but rather talk about the process as a whole. These maps are also available online if you would like to look at them in more detail. This is the hunting system map, and as you can see, there are a lot more city here with both more components and more connections. So there are a number of interesting things that came out of the process. What we see here is that both the number of components and the number of connections increased for both consumption and hunting when we move from an individual map to a group map, which has been discussed in the workshop. We also found that hunting had a far more complex map than consumption, perhaps because it's interlinked to so many other sectors, such as commercial, selling bushmeat commercially as well. What we also found was that consumption and hunting both increased in complexity during this process, indicating a level of social learning had occurred. We were next able to add a few different interventions into these system maps to see how the system might respond. So, for example, we were able to integrate ecotourism or micro-enterprise into the map. Micro-enterprise being when grants are given to individuals to create small businesses. And what these graphs show here is the relative expected change of the different components in the system when this specific intervention is added. For example, under the micro-enterprise scenario, the dependence of communities on wildlife resources is expected to decrease, while food security is expected to increase. This is really helpful in trying to understand how the system as a whole might function under different interventions, and then help decision makers make a choice about which one is right according to their goals. In terms of evaluating the process, we found that participants found it relatively easy to understand and quite fair, and also that it helped very much, or mostly helped, to understand this complex system, these complex systems. The strengths of the FCM were that they allowed the major causes to be visualized, and also that it allowed more areas to consider in their duties to come to light. The main problems with this process was that it was sometimes difficult for experts to link factors that were not directly linked to the main problem of bushmeat hunting or consumption. There were three concepts that were shared as important across both maps. They were poverty, human population, and political will. Political will being the impetus that the government has to tackle this problem as it should be. We also found that by eliciting individual cognitive maps prior to the workshop setting and then combining them, we allow individuals who may not feel comfortable expressing their viewpoints in a large group to be adequately represented. We also found that there was a change between the pre-workshop or individual stages and the group stages, in that there was an increase in complexity and density in the maps, which indicates collaboration and knowledge sharing occurred over this multi-stage process, potentially resulting in social learning as well. We also found that the FCM process allowed for the integration of multiple knowledge sources and kinds of data. So this would be helpful to help link the views of communities to those of practitioners. We found that this approach in general allowed detailed discussion and facilitated a shared understanding of the complex systems of bushmeat hunting and consumption, which is potentially applicable to many other illegal wildlife trade systems. Thank you so much for your time. And I would like to thank my funders and the participants of the research. And if you're interested, please go look at our paper online to learn more. Goodbye.